Good morning and welcome to the Talk of the Town. My guest this morning is Professor Siri Hettige, Emeritus Professor, University of Colombo. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
Professor, any country needs to rely on a stable and effective institutional framework. But in Sri Lanka, we oftentimes see politicization of institutions, mismanagement of institutions, ineffective institutions. Speak to us about how important it is to have a stable institutional framework.
No modern society can survive, let alone flourish, without, plethora of institutions in various sectors. And we naturally recognize it in Sri Lanka, even before independence. And we have established, so many institutions, hundreds of institutions, under various acts of parliament. And if you really read the acts of parliament that have given rise to these institutions, you will see that they were established, each one of those was established for a particular purpose, and they had a particular mission. Now what happened is, once you establish all these institutions, you have to make sure that you make use of these institutions for the purpose that they have been established for. But in Sri Lanka, in more recent decades, I should say, in the first few decades, after independence, we have done very well, and we have actually had very effective institutions. There is no question about it. But when you really look at what happened over the last several decades, the situation has changed dramatically. And these institutions have been, basically mismanaged, and they have really not been made use of for the purpose for which they have been established. As a result, we are, on the one hand, burdened with this huge, budget that we have to really use to maintain this institution on the one hand, but really not getting very much out of these institutions. So that, I think, is a big problem, because some of these institutions are there on paper, and of course, they may still have their officers and so on and so forth in buildings and so on and so forth. But the fact of the matter is that they really do not perform the functions for which they were established for. So I think this has to be really, looked at very carefully, and should be taken very seriously by everyone, because these institutions are there, and these institutions are being maintained, and people are being, employed to, manage these institutions. But the point is that if they are not really performing, then we have a huge problem. So what we have to really do is to look at each one of these institutions and look at how they are functioning today, and explore the possibility of revamping them in order to make them effective and make sure that they perform the functions that they are supposed to perform.
Professor Hettige, you oftentimes speak of the good old days where the National Planning Council used to be in place. At the moment, is there a mechanism through which there is an overarching guidance mechanism provided, linking institutions, ministries, government departments? Because most of the sectors, such as education, peace and reconciliation, these intersect and overlap. So institutions can't really work in silos. There has to be integration. Is that a thing right now?
So if you take the National Planning Council, actually it was an interdisciplinary body. It had, eminent people coming from different disciplines, and of course they had their, areas of interest. Like some people were interested in the economy, some people interested in demography, some people were interested in education, some were interested in health, and so on and so forth. The point is that they all had to sit around the table and figure out how they could do integrated planning. You cannot do economic planning in isolation of educational planning. You cannot do educational planning in isolation of other areas that are connected to education. So the fact of the matter is that the National Planning Council that was established for the purpose did quite well in the first few decades, but unfortunately it was abolished. And of course you have to ask people who are responsible for the abolition of that council why they did that. But the fact of the matter is that today there is a dire need for integrated planning, because we are not only dealing with economic and social issues, we are also dealing with very huge problems emanating from climate change and so on and so forth. So you have to have integrated planning today. Therefore, intersectoral planning is very critical. Now, we have all the institutions, but the problem is that they do not necessarily come together and compare notes and so on, figure out how to really plan for interaction. Say, for instance, for education, we have a National Education Commission, which is responsible for education planning. And then you have, for the health sector, you have the Health Council and so on. Then transport, we have a National Transport Commission. But the problem is that now they are supposed to be the policy makers. They are supposed to be the people who guide the program development as well. Now, if you look at really what is happening in the country today, you really don't have these institutions really taking a lead. So we hear policies being, enunciated every now and then by the relevant ministers. I mean, every now and then we say, well, we change, we are going to do this, we are going to do that, and so on and so forth. Now, point is, from where did these ideas come?
They are not rooted in scientific data.
We do not know. I mean, the point is this.
Yeah.
Now, see, I think we have to make use of the institutions that we have in the country, and if there is an institutions that we need to establish for a particular purpose, that also we should do. I think there's a serious lacuna in this country with respect to national planning, and I think we certainly have to bring back the National Planning Council, and I don't know why there is resistance. I mean, one can imagine that, politicians like discretionary power, no? They would like to do things they want. So that might be the reason why they don't want council to tell them what to do, what not to do.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Siri Hettige, and it's back to the studio.